Hello and welcome to the Ideal Investor Show. My name is Axel Meyerhöfer and I'm the host of the Ideal Investor Show, where we show you the path to early retirement. Hello, welcome everybody to the Ideal Investor Show, where we are helping people to reach early retirement as fast as possible. And today we have our guest Riley here on the show, and he is doing something pretty similar. He has the Riley, and now I'm going to butcher this, Oickle. Is that about right?
Oickle. Yeah, very close.
Riley Oickle real estate investor website, and it's RileyOickle.com for everybody who wants to go there while we're talking with each other. So Riley, thank you for making the time. Thank you for being on the Ideal Investor Show. And maybe to start out with, can you do us a favor, introduce yourself a little bit, where you're coming from, where you live, and how did you get to have a real estate investing business?
Well, yeah, I guess just a bit of background. I'm 25 and I live in Toronto, Ontario. Originally, I'm from Nova Scotia, which is more towards the east coast of Canada, and grew up in kind of a small rural community in Nova Scotia. For university, I went to Western University, which was about a 20-hour drive towards London, Ontario. Not London, England, but kind of the other London.
Yeah, people totally underestimate how huge it is.
It's funny living there because you always had to say Ontario at the end, or else they thought that you were like living in London, England.
Yeah, totally.
Anyway, so I lived there for a few years during my undergrad, and then I moved to Toronto after. And it was kind of interesting when I did my undergrad. I didn't have a ton of support. My parents did the best they could, and they helped me out here and there. But when it came to the financials of actually paying off that university debt, there was a lot of it. And was around the second year I realized how much there would be if I kept doing what I was doing. So I started knocking on houses in my community of London, where I went to university, to do some home maintenance work. And I ended up just selling projects like window cleaning and pressure washing. And I did it all myself, and then I hired students from the university.
Oh, cool! Yeah,
did my first business there, and we by the third year we had around 15 students working for us, and we had to reach 6 figures a year, and it allowed me to kind of graduate into real estate investing, I like to say.
Yeah, that's very cool. So, what was the degree in?
Kinesiology is what the degree was in. So that's kind of the human kinetics, the study of the human body.
Yeah. So, are you still applying? Are you still applying that, or?
I am to my health and my nutrition. And whenever I kind of feel hurt or something's going on with my body, I'm like, I think I know what that might be, but I'm definitely not an expert in anything when it comes to that.
Is that somehow related to chiropractic, or is that different?
It can be a gateway. It can kind of be a stepping stone that people use into physio or chiro, osteo even. Athletic therapy is the most common.
Cool. Okay. Very good. So now you mentioned that you offered those services and started basically growing rapidly into running a business. Did you then start the real estate based on wanting to do something with the profits, or how did that transition happen?
The transition wasn't the way that a lot of people would think of it going, but I basically was in a position where I wanted to go from my window cleaning company into renewable energy. I took a few courses at university around sustainability, living green, and what that was. And that's very important to me. So I started looking into like different renewable energy businesses. The one in particular I wanted to run was geothermal. And that actually had the main asset that you needed to buy to run that business was a hydraulic drill. And that drill cost like $1.2 million. It was a pretty expensive thing.
Right.
And the barrier to entry for that business was like a lot more than my $300 set of squeegees and window cleaning solution for my first business. So I went to the bank and I was like, hey, can I get a loan for buying this drill? And they asked me what assets I owned. And I said, well, I own my $2,000 Jeep Liberty, or my Chevrolet Equinox is what I owned back then.
Yeah.
And they laughed me out of the door there, so I left discouraged and my head was down, and I'm like, yeah, well, it is what it is. But that really lit the fire under my butt to go and learn what assets were and how I get them. Yeah. And I realized that stocks weren't really considered assets in the eyes of the bank. And so that's what led me into like learning a lot more about real estate investing. And within a year and a half after that, I bought my first one.
Okay, that's very cool. Actually, kind of the running joke is you only need an expensive drill when you have to drill deep, right? So if you do your business in Iceland, you can use a normal hand drill and probably get your geothermal business going, but then there's no real estate in Iceland.
True.
So
Yeah.
you need a long, long hose to get there to Canada. So yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So what was the first deal?
The first one was a single family home,
Okay.
and
In
yeah,
Toronto or where you were living at the
not
time?
at all. No, couldn't be. No, that was about 2 hours away, more rural. So it was in the
Uh,
middle of nowhere, kind of on like a border city, just
mhm.
like in Sarnia, Ontario. But we bought it for 240,000 or so. Um, did a whole renovation to it. And now it's re-rented. It's cash flowing quite well, actually. It's doing probably $800 a month now. Eight
Okay,
nine hundred
very
dollars
cool.
for single
And
family. Yeah.
what I really loved, and you mentioned a little bit about that earlier, and I have to be honest to say, I wish I had found, just to touch a little bit on what we do in our business, in the Ideal Wealth Grower business. We're basically trying to also help people to invest in majority residential real estate, single family, duplex, triplex properties with the goal of creating passive income so that they ultimately can reach the time freedom point, which is basically the point in time where if you figure out how much do I need to live, and everybody has a different number. Somebody says, I don't know, I need $3,000 or $4,000. Somebody else may say six, seven, eight, whatever the number is, but you can figure out how many properties do I need with passive income to ultimately get there. So that's basically the idea. But one of the things that is still, and maybe it's an American thing, contractors and developers, whether they do renovation or even when they do build to rent, meaning like newly built properties, are still somewhat shying away from really integrating sustainability systems. And I have said for years, I would love to find an opportunity to actually invest in deals that are from the get-go, either through renovation or through building them right from the get-go with a sustainability mindset involved. And I'm really curious in two things. The first one is when people say, yeah, but they still need to perform, what's your experience as far as people willing to pay, let's say, a little more rent if they have the advantage of those environmentally friendly systems, or how do you go about that?
Yeah. No, it's definitely an interesting idea. When it comes to the tenants paying more in rent, that usually doesn't go over so well. Like no one really like when it comes to being a tenant, they're not going to look at like, oh, is the lighting efficient or is the toilet set up in a way that it will allow for there to be less water? Like you can have that special toilet that flushes less water, or they don't really care if the installation was more environmentally friendly. Like they don't really like I haven't been able to get them to be convinced yet to pay more in rent for those things. But for some they are, but like for the most part they're not. That like, oh well, you did this all green or you did this in a more sustainable way. That's more radical when what everyone else is doing.
Okay, cool.
What
Yeah.
tends to be true though is like it really attracts the right type of partner
Right.
when we're partnering on a project because now it's we're keeping in mind that the environment's important when we're doing a renovation. We're reusing things, we're recycling them, and actually by default, it also helps the investment when we can be a bit more smart and we can try to reuse materials or like for example, a countertop. A lot of the time, we can actually redo a countertop and reface it, or reface a bathtub than to just throw it away.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. One
two
thing
hundred
that
dollars to
I
replace that bathtub, or $200 to just paint it over and like make it look almost as good as new.
yeah,
We
yeah.
usually go towards just fixing it up, right?
Yeah, that's very cool. One thing that I've seen done, and I've actually contemplated to do this myself on existing properties, is to instead of separating all the individual pieces of the deal, so to speak, out, to combine them for the tenant, right? Like in it is more traditional to say, okay, here is how much you have to pay me for rent, and then you sign up for all the utilities, and then you get your bill every month and you pay your utilities and you pay me the rent and good to go. And what I found, and we have actually good examples here from my personal experience, where when we first moved into the house that we live in right now, It was just at the beginning of summer, and when we were just turning on the air conditioning, it was hot, the insulation wasn't very good, blah, blah, blah. But end of story, we paid in the first month $600 in electricity, and it kept going up a little bit for the next 2 months and then started coming down as temperatures came down. Then we put a massive solar system on the roof, and since then, for the last 5 years, paid zero. Right. So if you really think about it that way, that has always been one of the ideas that I had to say, okay, well, you can look at purely the rent. House A costs $1,000, house B costs $1,000, about similar size, everything. But the one has $500 a month in utilities and the other one has barely anything. So your true total costs can be different, right? Because of those measures. So I have been wondering, if you could tell somebody, if you look at the total cost and you pay me $1,300, yes, it's $300 more in rent compared to the house next door, but you have basically no utility. So in the end, pay still less or not more for all these benefits to the environment. So that is something that we have been contemplating. The problem is we have, like I said, not been able to find a developer who is actually willing to say, okay, I put all this in because I buy the argument. Right, because I'm not building this stuff or renovating this stuff myself. It's always through third parties that we're hiring to do this. So with this sustainability aspect that you guys are doing, how do you actually help? You said you're helping people or try to help people similar to what we do to actually get into real estate investing. Do you have maybe a story or an example that you can share?
Yeah, of course. Well, I realized that early on when I was trying to educate myself on all of this, because the industry goes so deep in knowledge. There's a lot out there, a lot of people that help people, and there's podcasts, there's YouTube videos, there's books, there's a lot. I was listening to podcasts when I was like working out, watching YouTube videos when I'm eating dinner, lunch, whatever, like just full immersion. Whenever I had a minute, it was to consume this stuff. And it's good, like listening to podcasts like this for whoever's listening is a good way to start just piercing that veil and learning a bit more about day in the life and how all this works. Though at the end of the day, like it ends up being like, to an extent, not exactly like the next best step forward. Because I was in this state for like a year and a half where I was just consuming a bunch of different information, 12 different strategies and 15 different cities I was focused on, and different property types like multifamily, residential, commercial, multi-use, land development, single families, conversions. And because of all of that, I had very little focus and I was super distracted. So it wasn't until I got very focused on exactly what I wanted to do and what I wanted to buy and where, that I ended up getting friction and traction, let's say, to buy that first property. So what I do now in like my coaching is just simply like, I want to do that same thing that I kind of went through mentally in my own investing kind of learning curve and pass it on to someone else, because it took me much longer than it probably should have. I think that year and a half of like learning probably could have been shortened down into probably 3 or 4 months worth of information had I just learned exactly what I wanted to know and needed to know and nothing extra. So
yeah, that's very good advice.
Idea of what I do now for coaching and help people is out of frustration. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very good advice. I mean, one thing, sometimes people ask me, why did you call the business when you first started Ideal Wealth Grower? And oftentimes they think, yeah, I understand that you probably want to grow wealth or you want to grow income. But that's not all of it. And maybe both to the people that follow you as well as our audience, I want to reiterate, the grower word is also an abbreviation for the way we coach or how we mentor. And what it really does is it looks at a circle or cycle, if you want to say, okay, how do we actually engage with each other? And the first thing, the biggest thing on that, the G stands for goal, right? So does somebody, for example, want to invest in single family or residential real estate, or do they want to do multifamily, or do they want storage units or stuff? And where do you want to go? Then the next step is, what's the current reality that you're actually facing, right? Do you have money to invest? Do you still need to get the right things in place? Whatever that might be. Then to look at O stands for opportunities and obstacles. Like what could you do right away, like you were saying, Riley, but also there might be obstacles, right? You might be in an unfavorable location, or you have so much expense that there's very little to save or stuff. How can we do something about that? So that's that. Then the W is what actions are you willing or able to take? That's totally different from person to person, but when you relate it to the goal, then it makes kind of sense, right? That you take actions that get you closer to the goal. And that's where I said it's a cycle, right? Like you can find the original idea comes from John Whitmore, who wrote a book about performance coaching and describes the GROW model. And I expanded that to say, okay, so that's all good for the first session, or maybe two. But now that you come together and actually talk about it after you have taken the first few actions, you would say, okay, so what was your experience, Riley? How did it go? What did you, right? So then the person would actually discuss that. And then the last point before you go into the new cycle, the new session would be to say, okay, does any of the things that you experienced from your action change your goal or how you want to move forward? And that's basically what we mean by grower, right? And so exactly like you said, I totally second that, is a lot of people end up in what we call in the US analysis paralysis. You get such a wave of information that you get paralyzed in, I don't really know what to do anymore. I know a lot more now, like you said, immersed in podcasts and all kinds of books and stuff for hours and hours, but it becomes overwhelming, right? So when somebody contacts you, how would, let's say, the first couple of weeks or couple of sessions look like in high level, without going into too much detail?
Yeah, well, at a high level, similar to what I just mentioned, it tends to be just kind of unlocking the code for what makes the most sense for them. Mm-hmm. And there's really 3 different steps. So the first, call it month, the main focus is on identifying which city makes the most sense for them. Right. And do a city research exercise so that they know which city makes the most sense. Once they identify their city that they want to buy in, then it's which type of property. So, again, multifamily residential, commercial, land development, whatever. And so once we identify that city or that type of property in the city, then the last one is, well, which type of strategy makes the most sense for what you're looking for? Is it more like active income? Is it money that's going to be in your pocket today or this week or this month, like immediately? Because if it is, don't go buy a turnkey property and hold on to it for 15 years.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not going to supplement your active income, you being your 9 to 5 or whatever you need. Maybe you want to do flipping or wholesaling, something that's more immediate. But if it's more wealth creation, if you're looking to, look at the 10, 15, 20 year game and buy something and hold on to it, then maybe the BRRRR is a great method, or the rent to own. So we have to identify that strategy for them. So once you get that city, the type of property, and the strategy, then you're off to the races, because at least now we have kind of a track to play on, and then it comes down to like the specific coaching around that. But that would be the very first month, is getting clear on the answers to those 3.
Yeah, that's very cool, and thanks for describing that. And I think what if I were to summarize and paraphrase that, is there is a fundamental decision in the very beginning, and this is also kind of like a kind of fork in the path that I find oftentimes with our customers, is the fundamental decision: do I want to actively get involved in the industry, or do I want to passively benefit from it? Right? If I don't want to do flipping, if I don't want to do renovations, if I don't want to do the BRRRR method, if I don't want to actively become a property manager or a broker or an agent or any of those kind of things, what other alternative do I have? And there's always trade-offs, right? The more active, I hope you would agree, one wants to jump in, the more immediate the returns will be if they are more on the side where we play, because most of us either have a business or a job and want to be passive. Then, like you said, the 8, 10, 12-year plan on keep buying properties through turnkey providers, where they do pretty much everything for you, and all you need to do is basically keep an eye on it once a month and collect the cash flow, is a fundamental decision at the very beginning that people need to make. Now, one thing that I'm oftentimes asked, and I'm really curious, Riley, what your answer is when you get that question, is how much money do I need to bring to the table before I can do investments?
Yeah, well, technically none, but it kind of depends on if you're joint venturing, if you're gonna partner with someone, right? So if you realize that, and this is something that each person needs to decide for themselves, but if you realize that you're working super hard at whatever you're doing and you don't have much time available, then you usually being the active partner, that person that's going to be finding the property, analyzing it, renovating it, doing the property management, the bookkeeping, that can be a full-time job after you get up to like 5 or even 10 properties.
Right.
But if you want to build a portfolio of say 5 or 10 properties or more, and you don't have a ton of time to put into the building it, then you want to partner with someone that does have that time, they have the expertise, and then you're just putting in the money in the down payment, like the down payment, the closing costs, and the renovation, along with the mortgage typically. So if that's the case, pretty like for me to partner with me, it's a minimum 100,000. So, we're buying properties that are usually at least 300 grand. So 300,000, 20% down is 60,000, 5,000 for closing costs is, that brings up to 65,000. And then usually the renovation is at least 35,000 for say a 3-unit building. So that'd be around 100 grand bare minimum. But hey, like for my first property, I partnered with someone else and, didn't put in my own money. And I really haven't much to build up the portfolio I have. I've just partnered with people and I do all the heavy lifting and then they just put in the money and the mortgage.
Yeah. Okay. That's pretty cool. Thank you for describing that. This $300,000 point, is that for like a single property or for multiple properties, or how does that fit into the picture?
That would be for one property.
Mm-hmm.
That's 3 separate self-contained units. So there would be, it would be a triplex.
Okay. And is there any kind of performance goal? How much money an investor would get out of that?
Yeah. Well, the rough numbers would be, it's $100,000 per unit,
Mm-hmm.
and each unit would bring in around $1,000 a month in rent.
So you're basically applying, we call that the 1% rule, right?
Yeah.
Like we want to basically try to reach that. If it's slightly below, ideally slightly above, so much the better. And maybe one thing a little bit more technical than so far what we talked about is, do you have any kind of suggestions on avoiding turnover?
Avoiding turnover. Treat your tenants as your clients.
Okay.
Don't treat them as like they're your employees or they owe you something. Like, I think be the opposite of like the slumlord definition. That's really the truth. Like over-service them.
Right.
I've rented myself, and my favorite landlords have been the one that, when there's a maintenance issue, they're there within the week, if not within the day. And, even when it comes to like the holidays, they bring a bottle of wine, like just a $10, $15 bottle of wine. It's that gesture or something of that nature. It doesn't have to be wine, but that can be all you need. And then you're willing to do those extra things to not bother that landlord, not bother the owner when you know that you're being treated well as their client. And then, naturally they're going to want to stay longer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that last part is really the important part. Number one, I always say, the quality of renovation, especially when the tenants move in after the property has been renovated, is a really important thing, because if they feel like they're moving into a new apartment or a new unit, like you called it, or in our case, a new house, appearance wise, from a renovation perspective, then that is a great thing and they treat it better. And if you can get them to stay 2 or 3 years at a time, then your turnover cost is relatively low. So with time coming to an end, Riley, I have one last question that I ask everybody that comes on our show, and that is, if you had a time machine, where would you go and why?
Where would I go? I think, geez, that's a really good question. I've never been asked that. These questions off guard. Where would I go and why? I would have to say that I'd want to go into the future.
Okay.
Even just 10 years. I'm going to say I'd like to go into the future 30 years.
Okay.
And I want to meet myself and just ask myself what lessons have you learned, and just pick the brain of my older self to then be able to maybe not make those mistakes or those failures a bit earlier. Because I've always thought that that's an interesting idea, to be able to go and sit down with yourself in the future and just see who you've become, and also just become better, I guess.
Yeah. Well, you got to be careful not to disturb the time-space continuum. You know that, right? So, no, but that's a cool thing. I would have thought you would say I go to like Mars with Elon and see what the colony is doing in 30 years. Okay, well, Riley, it was fun. One thing I want to give you an opportunity for our audience. How do they get a hold of you if they like what they hear? Maybe want to find out how to invest in a sustainable development with you, or partner with you, or maybe get your coaching.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, if anyone's wanting to connect, you can easily connect there on my website. So you can go to RileyOickle.com. So it's RileyOickle.com. And you can schedule a call with me there. The other way as well is you can send me a direct message on Instagram or Facebook at Riley Oickle Investor, and happy to connect with anyone.
Yeah, that's awesome. And we're going to put all those links and stuff in the show notes so people can easily find it. So with that being said, Riley, I know we both have to run. I want to thank you again for making the time. I'm sure the audience is quite fascinated to combine investing in real estate and still have a sustainable mindset applied to that. So thank you again for being here, and have a good rest of your week.
All right. Thanks, Axel.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Ideal Investor Show. More info and the links we mentioned during the show are in the show notes, or you can go to our website at idealwealthgrower.com and find them there. Sign up for the Apple Podcast link, the RSS feed, the Spotify link, and if you like to talk to me, please sign up for a strategy call at idealwealthgrower.com. So hopefully you want to share what you learned with your network and bring more people in. We are really eager to hear your comments. And until next time, be well, stay safe, and ciao.